Okay, we should be live now. So I'm
Okay,
just waiting to see us on live on my phone so I can
sure.
follow the comments. So we should appear soon. Oh, I delete all of that afterwards. Ah, yeah. Okay, so live, so I can see any questions coming in. Um, okay. Oh, volume. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to start.
Okay,
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last session of the second day of the Grand Multiliteracy event. And we're with April Wu today. So welcome, April. How are you?
good. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting my invitation to be here. And so during this event, we have spoken with researchers, and so we have seen about the research. Then we went into more practical tips in the morning today, during the night for you. And to finish, we are going to go into more specific challenges that different languages have. So with you, we're going to see how we can teach our children and students how to memorize all these thousands of characters that there is to be able to read Chinese or Japanese, for example. So I'm going to make a short introduction. Yeah, but before that, just to mention as well, for Chinese characters, if people following us or catching up with the video after, or have Japanese as one of their languages, I did as well a video with Horike Sensei, who used to be my teacher when I was in secondary school. Uh,
Oh,
and yeah, now she became a parent and she's trying to do lots of things to help children growing up outside Japan to learn the Chinese characters, the kanji. So it's
mhm.
two videos. You probably have many similar points, but probably different experiences. So I think can be quite enriching for everybody to watch it. I'm just subtitling it at the moment. I'm not finished, but it should be up tomorrow. And so I'm going to introduce our guest, who is April Wu. So you grew up in a bilingual household with Mandarin and English, and you pursued a master's degree in bilingual education, and you're now a Mandarin Dual Language Immersion teacher.
Mhm.
You also have a side business called Seedlingo, to share your passion and provide educational resources, products to support and encourage families with similar aspirations of raising bilingual and multilingual children. And you're generously giving away one of your Montessori-inspired card pack. So for those of you following us right now or later on, you can find the link I'll put it in the description below, but you can find it also in the program by going to the description, April, and click on the red gift icon. You're also raising a trilingual daughter
Yeah.
with Mandarin, Spanish, and English. So you have both the teacher's hat and the parent's hat. So it's going
Yeah.
to be hopefully very interesting. And you grew up yourself bilingual in the United States, I guess, all the
Hmm.
time. Yeah. So you
Hmm.
have three hats. So the
Yeah.
former child, the parent, and the teacher. Uh,
Yes.
so before we start, is there anything you would like to add to your introduction?
I mean, basically, just I really love learning languages and learning about different cultures. So I did in college study Japanese for about 2 years. I studied abroad in Kyoto for 3-4 months, and I also learned Spanish in middle school and high school. So that's a little bit of extra language background about me. Hmm.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And so, as I mentioned, you grew up yourself. So you grew up in the United States with Chinese and English. So
Hmm.
how was your own experience as a child growing up bilingual? But I would like to ask more precisely about the multiliteracy aspect. So learning to read and write in Chinese
Sure.
when you don't have and you have everything English around you. And was it
Mhm.
positive, negative? Did you go to a school, or how was it?
Mhm. Right. Yeah. So I grew up in a bilingual household. So, well, actually almost trilingual because my parents spoke to each other in Taiwanese.
Ah,
They never spoke to us in Taiwanese, but they spoke to each other in Taiwanese. So I grew up having an ear to listen for Taiwanese, but
yeah,
I still can't speak it to this day. So they spoke to us in Mandarin. So it was Mandarin at home, then obviously English at school, the community language. And so it was a lot was focused on listening and speaking the first few years growing up.
yeah,
I did eventually attend Chinese school on the weekends. I know you mentioned you attended Japanese school on the weekends
yeah.
too. Um, so I think I started that in second grade officially. I did do some other classes before second grade, but for second grade up to fifth grade, it was pretty religious. Every weekend I would go. And I don't know how Chinese school is, how they run nowadays, but back then it was very dry, very traditional. I think a lot of the teachers might not have had a lot of experience teaching. Maybe some of them were parents themselves wanting just to
Yeah,
help
an
out
experience.
at a school, right? So um, it was always a battle every weekend. Like, why do I have to go to Chinese school? Or like, why do I have to learn Chinese? So that was very interesting. Where I lived back then when I was younger, there were not many dual language immersion schools. Now there's so many. They're popping up everywhere, but back then it was very limited. And so, like you, actually, to be honest, in terms of literacy, reading and writing, the development was very slow. And quite often, I wouldn't remember the characters.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, so
the
very
same, exactly the same.
yes, and copy. Like, oh my gosh, when am I going to be done with the homework? So I think a lot of families can relate, especially those like me who are also American-born Chinese, ABCs.
Yeah,
I think the experience is pretty similar for this
yeah.
generation. But what really shifted the dynamics for me for Chinese literacy in particular was I actually lived in Taiwan for a year when I was in sixth grade.
Okay. Oh, wow,
And
that's would have helped a
yeah,
lot. Yeah.
yeah. And it was actually quite challenging because starting in sixth grade in Taiwan at the time, they removed the it's called 注音. So it's like pinyin. It's the phonetic
Little
representation of
signs.
the,
Yeah,
yeah, it's like the romanization. So you use like the English alphabet to, well, that's pinyin. You use the English alphabet to write out the sounds for the characters.
yeah,
And in Taiwan, they have another system. So it's a way to pronounce
yeah.
the Chinese characters. So in sixth grade, they don't have that support anymore. So
Oh,
they
wow.
stopped that support in the textbooks, I think fourth grade. Fourth grade is the last grade that they offer that in the textbooks. So I actually went down 2 grades. So instead of attending sixth grade, I actually attended fourth grade in
Yeah.
Taiwan, which is really interesting, just so I could have that support.
Mm.
But I lived there for a year, obviously immersed in the language, right? The culture. All my friends spoke Mandarin. Everything I was reading, seeing, writing was all in Mandarin. So that 1 year, I think my Chinese level, when I came back to the States after that 1 year, I had to test in to see what level I was in for Chinese school. Because I did go back and finish Chinese school. I think I jumped at least 4 or 5 books. So each book is one level. So I jumped a lot just that 1 year. And I realized my relationship with Chinese was a little bit different when I came back because I had more, I guess Chinese was a little bit easier for me because I had lived in Taiwan that whole year. It wasn't so much of a struggle anymore, or maybe because I was also older, but I didn't have the same struggle I had, you know, prior to living in Taiwan, where I was always complaining about Chinese school, couldn't remember the characters, couldn't write them. When I came back, it was actually much better.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big shift after I lived in Taiwan for a year. Yeah. Yeah, it's very
Wow.
interesting. So that was very effective for me. And then I finished Chinese school, I think when I was in high school. And then in college, because I minored in Asian languages and cultures, I took a few courses on advanced Chinese, and then that's also when I took Japanese. So that's pretty much my whole experience learning Chinese. And then I became a Mandarin Dual Language Immersion teacher. And then
Yeah.
so now I'm teaching Chinese to elementary age students.
So, yeah, we're going to come back as well on this aspect of how you teach children in your school and how
Sure.
you're, I guess, starting to teach your daughter as well.
Yeah.
But so you have a daughter who is, I think, 3 years old.
That's
Yeah.
right. Her birthday's
And then
tomorrow.
3 tomorrow.
Yes, three
Ah,
tomorrow.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So happy birthday a little in advance. And
Thank you.
so you're raising her with Mandarin and as well as English and Spanish, and you
Yes,
teach children who are a bit older.
correct.
And to start with, would you like to, uh, uh, would you be able to explain? If you're doing anything for your daughter already regarding Chinese writing?
Sure. So in regards to Chinese writing, like the true writing, like pencil and paper, not so much
Yeah,
because she's so young,
yeah,
right? She's still learning how to hold a crayon. So not writing in that sense.
yeah, yeah,
Um, what I'm doing right now, I'm really is just establishing a love for Mandarin, right? Um,
yeah,
building up a lot of her listening and speaking skills as her foundation. Also doing a lot of reading before I dive too much into writing. But I think once I start going into more writing, I would start with more developmentally appropriate activities. So it's not so much pencil and paper.
yeah,
Some people might know early childhood education, they do a lot of like tactile things. So maybe
yeah,
writing in sand, writing in
yeah,
salt,
yeah.
maybe using like shaving cream or
Ah, yeah,
some
yeah, yeah,
whipping cream to write.
yeah.
Right now when she takes a shower, we have glass doors. So
Wow.
once
Ah,
it steams up,
yeah,
I noticed she started drawing and writing, and she'll tell me, "Oh, can you write my name?" And so we'll write like on the shower door wall. So things that are not the traditional way of writing, but just getting her excited about
yeah.
literacy and language, right?
Okay.
For her age, at least right now.
Yeah.
So that's in terms of writing, that's what I'm doing right now. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ah, yeah, yeah. That's great because yeah, so but what you said about trying to get her like connecting emotionally with the language is quite important. So
Yes.
it doesn't need to be reading and writing, but with the language and the writing is part of it as well.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
so and long term, what are your plans? Or maybe you don't know exactly yet, but do you have some
Right.
ideas or things you think, I definitely want my daughter to have this experience or do this that way because either you benefited from it, maybe like going to Taiwan 1 year, or
Right.
is there anything you're thinking this is something I would like for my daughter to experience or
Yes.
do?
Yes, for sure. Actually, that's a really good question because um, I think a lot of times for children, for students, writing seems like a very daunting task, right? And writing is really challenging. You're putting your thoughts, first you got to think of the thoughts, and then you're putting it on paper, and you have to make it in a very cohesive and easy way for readers to understand. And that can be very challenging. And so I noticed, as a teacher, sometimes students really reject writing. And so I think at my school, what we've started implementing is something called Writer's Workshop. So
Okay.
basically, allowing students to take ownership of the topics that they want to write about so that it's more meaningful. You know,
That's
um,
amazing.
and so in terms of my daughter, I think what I would do is as she slowly transitions to actual writing, I think I would first, for young kids, you first model with pictures. So I might talk about our day, like what happened with our day, morning, afternoon, evening, and first start out with pictures, drawing pictures, because pictures is also their form of writing, right? They're communicating
Yeah,
their ideas.
that's such a good point.
Yeah, start with
Yeah,
pictures for the young kids. Then after pictures, you start with labeling. So labeling like house, labeling mom, labeling, the park. And then we're not focused. I think a lot of times some teachers and parents tend to focus too much on the conventions, like, oh, the spelling is wrong. There's no capitalizing. But that's actually the easiest thing to teach, really. The harder thing to teach is getting the ideas and how you're expressing them on paper. So not the conventions and the grammar, that's really easy to teach. So then for my daughter, I would just encourage her to label single words, then from single words, sentences, and then eventually sentences to paragraphs and topics that she's interested in. So anything that relates to her life would be really good. I mean, as a parent, I would do that, right? Because I'm not in the school setting, it's a little different, but we might write about our vacation. If we're going to go to the supermarket, we might write down a grocery list. Like writing is present in every day of our lives. It doesn't have to be tied to an assignment. Like, right, I can't think of a topic right now, but sometimes those type of topics are too dry. Like, what's your favorite sport? What's your favorite, somehow tie it into their life.
From reality. They see that there is no real impact. It's just for the sake of writing. But like you said, the shopping list is useful. You do this because you don't want to forget what you want to buy. So all these little things that can be like purposeful are very important.
Yeah, and embedded into her life. Maybe she misses grandma. Write a letter to grandma. Well, maybe I'll type it up or I'll actually mail it to grandma. Something that, like you said, purposeful, meaningful, that makes them want to write. So integrate it with their lives is really crucial.
Okay. And so because you mentioned that you spent a year in Taiwan, it helped you a lot. Are you planning of doing something similar with your daughter, or like whether it's a year or it can be a month or going to school?
I'm not too sure if, I haven't thought that far yet. I know for sure, like during the summer months, I do want to take her back to Taiwan because grandma lives there. And I know there's a lot of summer camps available. So that's something that I'm pretty sure I'll do. In terms of long term, like staying there for a whole year or two, I'm not too sure about that. But definitely over the summer months, I would want her to be in that kind of environment.
Okay, thank you. And so now we'd like to talk about your students who are a bit older. How old are they?
They're in second grade, so they're 7 and 8-year-olds.
Okay, and just to clarify, do you have just students who have English at home, or do some of them have Mandarin as well?
So at my school, the program has both types of students. So we have the native Mandarin speakers who speak Mandarin at home, and also the non-native Mandarin speakers who don't speak Mandarin. But what's really interesting about my community is that some of the even the native Mandarin speakers, they actually are stronger in English, most of them. So actually my class composition, if I look at it, the majority, actually, I would consider them Mandarin learners versus English learners. English learners, I just have a small percentage. The majority, their weaker language really is Mandarin. Yeah.
So it's for them, it's a new language then.
Yes.
For most of them. Okay. And so one thing that I'm wondering, because I don't read Chinese, but I know a little bit about it through Japanese. But so if it's an alphabetical a language based on alphabet, we can just learn a few dozen symbols, and then we just need to learn some combinations, but we can then virtually read everything. With Chinese, you need to learn every single character. And so I'm thinking that up to a certain point, there will be a gap between what you can say, what you can understand, and what you can actually read. So I'm imagining there would be frustration. but I'm not sure. So then if it's the case with your students, because it's a new language, so they learn the vocabulary at the same time. But how do you or would you deal with the possible frustration there could be? Or am I understanding the situation well? Or
Yes, yes. And, it's a very common problem, like you said, especially once they're older, because cognitively, they're more advanced and they're interested in more topics. And perhaps the topics they're interested in, for example, like some of my students are interested in space, for example, they might, some of them, maybe they have the listening and speaking vocabulary to understand audiobooks on space, but they can't really read it. Or it could also be the other problem actually for my students is maybe they are interested in space and they can read books about space in English, but when it comes to Chinese, their level is not there. So interest-wise, they want to read books about space in Chinese, let's say, but even if they try, it's not comprehensible for them because the Mandarin level is too high. So, but I guess I'll address your first question about, how do you compensate if they have the listening and speaking vocabulary, but they don't have the recognition, right, of the characters. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier about that romanization of the Chinese characters. So there's pinyin, which uses the English alphabet to write out how each character sounds. And then there's also in Taiwan, they use zhuyin, right? So a lot of books, if they can have that support, then it's almost like English where they can actually sound out the characters if they learn that system, the pinyin or the zhuyin. So that's very helpful. But it's still pretty challenging because you can't, it's especially in the US, it's hard to find a lot of books that have that, kind of support versus when you're in Asia. So I would say taking like a more balanced approach. So try to get books that have that phonetic support that your child has learned. At the same time, try to continually develop their character recognition through maybe leveled readers. So you have books that are at their level, and then books that may be a little more challenging, but then you have that phonetic support. So doing both to kind of develop their literacy, their reading skills in Mandarin Chinese.
Okay. And so for example, I was wondering in Japan, so I guess the equivalent of pinyin is, well, in Japanese, there is hiragana, and next to the kanji, they put furigana in manga and books like that. So for children, but manga can be for like even older children. And so for me, who was growing up in France, I felt like when I was reading manga, I could understand a lot more. First, because there were the pictures, but also because there were the furigana next to the kanji that told me how to read it.
Exactly.
But then, is there so the transition? So I guess in Taiwan, you said from grade 6, they don't have this support anymore.
5th grade, 4th grade is the last year they have it in the textbooks. At least when I was going to school, I don't know if it's different now, but 4th grade was the last year that they had that support. And then starting in 5th grade, it's just only the characters, Chinese characters.
Okay. And in the manga in Mandarin, do they have this support or not?
I think some do. So the ones geared towards younger readers will have that support. And again, the ones geared towards older students, children, young adults, won't have that support anymore, because by that time they probably expect you to have recognized enough characters to be able to read that.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm thinking for children growing up outside a Chinese speaking country, it might be frustrating to get at an age where the interest is, like, for example, space and detective stories, etc., but they can't access it because they don't have the help anymore. What would you advise to parents regarding trying to bridge this gap to be able for them to pursue their interests, and to be able to read as well?
Yeah, that's a challenging one. I mean, there's a lot of indie authors and some publishing companies nowadays
Um,
who want to create books or content to meet, these type of learners, especially outside of Asia. So trying
yeah,
to find resources there. But it is hard. So I think just going back to what I said earlier, trying to find books that do have the phonetic support, right? So you can
yeah,
try to pursue your interest there. There's a lot of audiobooks now too, or even on YouTube that offer that guidance. So one series is getting books that follow the interest or listening to stories, actually listening, speaking, reading, and writing, they're all kind of
yeah,
interconnected. So if they can listen to more stories, they can acquire more vocabulary. Then when there is a book that has a topic that they're interested in, and then they can sound out the characters, then they'll be able to access that content. And the other strand is continuing to develop their character recognition as well.
okay,
Yeah, it's
okay.
it's a challenging one that myself as a teacher and parents are still trying to find those resources
Yeah.
to
Yes,
meet
it's
the
not just about the willingness to do something, it's also the resources.
needs.
If
Yes,
we don't have them, it makes it a lot more challenging.
I
So
know.
it's good to hear that there are some publishing companies who are working on this aspect as well. Is there any that you would be able to mention? So
Um,
parents can start looking for books there?
right. If parents are interested, especially for the older kids, they can send me a message on Instagram because I don't
Yeah.
have it off the top of my head. I know at my school, the upper grade teachers use a series, but for some reason I can't remember the series right now off the
It's
top of
fine.
my
Yeah, it's
head.
okay.
So if they message me, I can get back to them. And
Okay.
I had another idea, but it left me. If it comes back, I'll
Yeah.
let you know. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And now, so I was interested in the way you put on reading, writing. So should we put as much effort on reading, writing, or should we prioritize one over the other? Uh,
Mm,
and also, do you think that one can help the learning of the other? So
right.
what's the relationship you have between reading and writing in your
Yeah,
classroom, maybe, and also maybe what you would do at home with your daughter when she's a bit
right.
older?
Right. So I think traditionally speaking, the progression is, listening, then speaking, then reading and writing, right? And
Yeah,
the overarching concept is still listening, speaking, reading, and writing. But I do believe that listening and speaking, help to reinforce each other, right? The more you speak to someone, the more you listen, it helps. So it helps enhance both skills. And the same goes for reading and writing. So in my classroom, we're reading text, we're learning characters, but at the same time, we're also writing. And as you write, you're also reinforcing the reading. But with the writing, like I mentioned earlier, also the same issue with reading, what they can express is a lot more than they can write,
yeah,
right? So they might be able to say a full complete sentence in Chinese, but they can't write that sentence because
yeah,
they haven't learned all the characters.
yeah,
So writer's workshop, what I do in my classroom is I allow them to use a combination of characters they've learned, also use pinging to, if they can somehow sound it out and use the romanization, they can use that. And if
ah,
they absolutely don't know how to say it in Chinese, then I do allow them to use some English words here and there. So it's like Chinglish, Chinese and English.
yeah,
So in their writing, this is very developmentally appropriate. It's a combination of characters, pinging, and English,
yeah,
so they can get their thoughts down and actually work on the craft of writing and not get stuck on the fact that I don't know this character, so then I can't write, and then just
yeah.
read.
That's
Mm-hmm.
such a good way of doing it because it's not just you can write or you can't write. It's not like one or the other. There are
Mm-hmm.
steps. So if you allow them to use what they know, so to replace the parts they don't know, it's like scaffolding and they can go up one step at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
yeah. just we have a few people following us live. If you have any question, don't hesitate to put them down in the comments. I keeping an eye on my phone, so I will see your comments and questions. So don't hesitate to do that. I have another question regarding writing.
Mhm.
So you were saying it was the same for you when you were in going to your Chinese school when you were a child, but I was also told that when I was learning the kanji, the way to learn it is to just to write
Mhm.
again and again and again. And I remember that I also had weekly tests on the kanji,
Right.
and sometimes, so when I was in primary school, it was fine, but in secondary school, there were words I didn't know what they meant, but I learned them anyway for the test. And in the end, okay, maybe I got a good score in the test, but like a few days after, I didn't remember them.
Right.
Uh, so my question is, so on the one hand, about this way of doing it, so what would you, so like you said, many parents would naturally do that as well because that's how they were taught. How
Mhm.
how else would you help children to memorize the characters? And no,
Right.
actually, let's start with this question before I ask my other one.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so I think, like with kanji, like with Chinese characters, you can't dismiss the fact that you do need some repetition, right? So
Yeah.
you do need to copy them, several times. For my classroom for homework, they do have character worksheets. And in the classroom, we also do copy them down a little bit, not too much, but 5 to 10 times for each character, and then they practice more at home. But we can't solely just rely on that repetition, because when you're just repeating the character, tracing it 1, 2, 3, countless times, there is muscle memory in terms of the stroke
Mm,
order and the character you're writing, but where's the context, right? Where's the meaning? Do you know what character you're writing? Do you know how to use that character? That is not enough. So that repetition is mainly just so kids can memorize how to just write the character, but can they truly use the character? So it goes back to what we were discussing earlier about writing, is somehow embedding it into their lives, with a grocery shopping list, with a letter to grandma or a relative. So taking what they already acquired, when they wrote it repetitively, and also pulling from that and utilizing it in their daily lives.
Meaning like
So
context.
yeah, context is so important. And I just suddenly had a thought about, that one year I lived in Taiwan, like why were the characters able to stick better? Like how come I could read more characters? How come I could remember to write more? And I really think that's it. It's because it became a part of my life.
Yeah.
Whereas before, it was just every weekend I go to Chinese school,
Yeah.
and then on Monday through Friday, I go to my regular English school, and I don't think about Chinese anymore. But in Taiwan that one year, I was living and breathing Chinese, right? I go to school, I copy the characters, I learn how to use it. But then after school, on the weekends, I'm going to the market, I'm going to the park, I see Chinese everywhere. I'm reading Chinese. Maybe I'm writing a letter to a friend because my friends don't speak English and I want to write them a letter. So I have to use Chinese to
Yeah.
write them a letter, right? So when it becomes integrated into your life, and when there's more meaning and purpose, it becomes embedded, right? You
Yeah.
remember it, and it's not just something that you do on the weekends.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference.
Okay. So
Yeah.
would it be correct to summarize by, if I'm a parent raising my child with Mandarin and I want my child to remember the characters, is to start by thinking what's going to be relevant for them. So for example, food for grocery shopping, etc. Or things to write to grandma. So these characters will always say like, hello, how are you, etc. So to start
Mhm.
with this, to then decide, okay, we can teach them these characters because that's going to be useful.
Yes, that could
Yeah.
be. Yes,
Okay.
yes. And of course, if kids want to express themselves and they don't know how to write the character, then they can write in pinyin, right? Or maybe that's an opportunity for them to learn new characters because they want to write it in the grocery
Yes.
list, or they want to write it in their letter, and they're more willing to learn new characters that way. And if there's motivation to learn, it also sticks more.
Yeah.
But the grocery list and the letters are just examples. There's so many other examples.
Yeah.
Some kids are really creative. They want to create stories or create comic books. I know your sons really like adding dialogue and or things like that. So there's so many different ways to just integrate it with their lives so that they can use it a lot more. And it's not just for school on the weekends or after
Yeah.
school.
Yeah. I think that's completely right. Like, if it's
Mhm.
just school on the weekend, it becomes an extra work. So it's
Yes.
like, okay, maybe my friends are going to football practice or soccer practice, but I need to go to that school. So it's like
I
extra work while the others are maybe having fun. It becomes a burden. So
Yes.
yeah.
I'm
And
laughing
I
because
guess,
that was me when I was younger. Like, why do I have to go and not, my friends are having fun. They're not going to school and I'm going to Chinese school.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to say something as well. Yes, also so what you said is let's integrate it in their lives, but if it's little by little as well, like when you said you're walking in the street and seeing like signs to go to the park, etc. It's just little bits you get here and there. It's not focusing one moment where you have to do a lot.
Mhm.
It's little by little, and it's in your life, so it's relevant. So I guess these are maybe the two things probably to
Yeah.
remember
Like,
to make it relevant, but also little bits add up more than just one big amount.
yeah, the consistency, right? Almost like learning an instrument. If you just
Ah,
practice for 1 hour once a week versus 10, 15 minutes every day,
yeah,
obviously practicing every day, it's better than that 1 hour, right?
yeah, exactly.
One
Yeah.
day. Mm-hmm.
And another question I had for writing is about the stroke order, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was told when I was in that school, Japanese school, that I had to write a certain order, and even in the let's say there were electronic like kanji dictionaries that would
Yes.
make the stroke appear one by one to show in what order
Yes.
you had to write them. Um,
Right.
and so when children are living outside a Chinese-speaking country, do you think
Mhm.
it's still important for them to learn the stroke order, or is it important at a certain time and maybe not later? What
Right.
do you think?
Right. Right. So, as a teacher who teaches, these Chinese characters,
Yeah.
there are different opinions out there, whether, oh,
Okay.
yes, they must follow the stroke order, or no, it's not a big deal. For me personally, I do think there is still a certain level of importance for the stroke orders because, the stroke order is designed so that it's the most efficient way to write the characters with the least amount of hand movements.
Really?
Could write a character however you want to write it, and you can still have a complete character. It might not look as neat as the one following the stroke order, but you can still achieve it, right? But how many times are you moving your hand to get that character? So the stroke
Okay.
order is very interesting. It's designed so that basically it's the most efficient way to write the characters. The most amount of strokes with the least amount of hand movements. So that's one reason why I do believe stroke order is important. And the second reason is, I guess it's the easiest way to create like the most aesthetically pleasing character, right?
Yeah.
That's the way it's designed. But one other really important thing that I do tell my families every year when we have, back to school night meetings in the beginning of the year, I tell my families the reason why it's so important because Chinese, even though there are, individual characters, each character, depending on what it is, it's almost like a puzzle. Sometimes you have more complex characters, and in that character, you have other
Yeah.
small characters, right? That build it up to become another character. And so if your child learns the stroke order for those little individual characters, when they're learning how to write this more complex character, it's not as hard and they're not just drawing the character anymore. They're actually writing, and they can say, oh, I know this character because I know the left part and I know the bottom part. I already have the stroke order memorized. It's easier to learn more challenging and more complex characters because they already have a foundation and the different components for that one character. Yeah.
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 And so another thing about writing is, so in Japanese, so I'm not sure how it works in Chinese, but in Japanese, a character has different pronunciations. There is the Japanese pronunciation for when it's isolating one word, and then when it's combined, generally it's the Chinese pronunciation, or well, it's not exactly a Chinese pronunciation, but it's derived from Chinese. So we have two pronunciations, and
Yeah.
some characters have, so you can see, because there is this part, it's this pronunciation. It's not to do with the meaning, but it's this pronunciation. The meaning is shown by another part in the character. Is it the same in Chinese or not?
Yes, you're talking about if there's one character and there's like two parts, right?
Yeah,
One
yeah,
part, it could be like the radical, like almost like in
yeah,
English, just a root word, right?
yeah,
So a meaning could be from a part of the character, but the other part of the character could be the sound of the character.
yeah.
Yeah, it's similar in Chinese as well.
Okay. So because when I interviewed my teacher, so she
Mhm.
explained that it's good to learn them like as groups, basically. But so we have this that sounds like this. So when you read this, you know it's going to be pronounced like this. And then the other parts that are going to tell you more about the meaning. Is that
Yeah.
the way as well you use to teach your children, or are they still too young to be at that stage?
Right. No, I definitely do use that strategy. If it happens to come up, if we happen to have a word where, actually, I could just think of a word right now. So the character for pants actually has two parts. So 裤子, right? And one part, the radical, actually, that character means clothing. But then
Yeah,
the other part of that character for pants is just the sound for the character. So definitely, if it happens to be a character that lends itself to that type of explanation, I will tell the kids, oh, one part is for the meaning and one part is for the sound. And they can start seeing that relationship in some of the other characters. And they notice it too. They'll say, oh, I see another character in this character.
yeah,
Um, Sometimes there's that relationship, sometimes not so much. So it's not always 100%
yeah.
the case, right?
Okay, that can be helpful. Yeah.
Yes, it can definitely be helpful. Yeah.
Okay. And
Mm.
so I wanted to speak as well about resources, maybe suggesting resources, but
Sure.
before, we've covered quite a wide range of things. Is there anything you feel like we have missed, we haven't talked about, that would be important for parents or teachers to know about helping our children and students to memorize all these characters?
Yeah, sure. So I think, we could talk all day about, finding resources, finding books, finding shows, all these things materials that we can use, right, to support
Mm,
their literacy. But there are two things that I just thought about that are very critical beyond the resources, beyond the materials. So one is, sometimes, us as parents or as teachers, we have these expectations for our children, right? But a lot of times we also have to step back and think ourselves, if we want our children, to learn Japanese, to learn Chinese, to read Japanese and to write Japanese or Chinese, are we ourselves as the adult modeling that as well? Like, are we ourselves
yes.
reading in Chinese? Are we ourselves also writing in Chinese? Because kids learn from adults. And if they see us doing that, they're more likely to do that
Yeah,
themselves. So it's modeling what we want our students or our children to do. It's
yeah,
not
that's
just
true.
something we want them to do, right? I
Yeah.
think that speaks volumes.
Okay.
Are we doing that ourselves as the caregivers? And I think the second thing is having a community, so that you don't feel you're alone, especially
Yes.
in the United States. It's hard raising bilingual or biliterate, multilingual children, especially if you happen to live in a community that doesn't have speakers of that language.
Yeah.
Then it becomes extra challenging and extra hard because you feel like you're the only one doing it.
Yeah.
So there's like Facebook groups. I'm part of one called Raising Children in English and Chinese, I think.
Okay.
That one is a really great group to join. There's a lot of
Oh,
resources out there, and you can feel like you're not alone. Any questions you can post, and other families all over the world are sharing, the trials and tribulations of raising bilingual children. So
if you could
so
send me the link
community
to
is
this, I
important.
can put in the description.
I'm sorry, what was that?
So if you can send me the link or
Sure.
the name, then I can
Yeah.
put in the description as well.
Okay. I will do that. Yes. Yes. I
Yeah, I
think
think
having
it's so
community. Yeah.
important yet to feel like we're not alone on this journey because
Mhm.
it's hard very often. So if
Yeah.
we feel like we are on our own, it's really easy to feel like, why am I doing all of this? But
Exactly.
when we know that others as well are doing the same thing, it keeps us going.
Yes.
And now with
Yeah.
the internet, it's so much easier to find a community because it doesn't need to be physically, it can be online.
Yes. Yeah. It's much easier nowadays with technology. Yeah.
Yeah, thank
Definitely.
you. And so to finish, I was wondering if you had any recommendation of resources for parents or teachers,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, to help
Sure.
with reading and writing.
Yeah. So I have heard of some resources. I haven't personally used them
Okay.
myself for
Yeah.
some of them. But there's a lot of leveled readers. So
Yeah.
it's books according to their level. Like I've seen people use one called Sage Books. That
Okay.
seems to be very systematic for them to acquire the Chinese characters. There's also one from Hong Kong, I think, called Greenfield. Um, there's one I purchased from Amazon called Mandarin Chinese for Kids by a company called Language Together. That one's pretty
Okay.
interesting. And let's see, in terms of digital resources, so at my school, we use these audio, it's also a leveled books, but it's all digital. So it's audio books. It's called Level Learning. We use that at my school. I've also heard of Chinese Reader. It's a similar idea, digital books. That way, kids can listen and follow along. Sometimes they can understand, but they can't read. So this
Yeah.
eliminates that problem, right? The audiobooks. There's also another website called Little Chinese Readers. They offer
Okay.
printables for little books. And there's also apps, but I haven't really explored that with my
Yeah.
daughter just yet. I know of a couple content creators on Instagram, Spot of Sunshine, and I think Mama
Yes.
Baby Mandarin. They're also teaching their children Mandarin Chinese, so they have also apps and resources like that. Um, I'm also working on self-publishing a book, and I also know other, indie authors, and so we're also
Yeah.
trying to meet this need where there's kids overseas who want to learn Mandarin. How do we
Yeah.
provide resources there? So I
Yeah.
mentioned a lot of these on my Instagram page, and more than happy to
Okay.
share if anyone has
Yeah, I'm
particular
going
questions.
to link that your YouTube, not YouTube, Instagram
Sure, yeah.
uh, handle in the description as well.
Yeah,
And if you can send me the links to these different
sure.
resources you have mentioned, I can put them in the description as well.
Okay. I will definitely do that. Yeah.
So thank you very much for your time and yeah, I think we've covered everything. Unless there
Yeah.
is anything else you want to add.
Um, no, I think just don't forget to sign up for the giveaway. I'm giving
Yeah,
away the bilingual flashcards that I created a year ago. I'm also working on creating more resources
yeah.
for support families, especially
Do you
those
want
living
to explain maybe a bit more about your card? So I know it's Montessori inspired, but
Yeah.
do you want to explain a bit more what it is?
Yeah. So the flashcards I designed based on my teaching background, right?
Yeah,
So, in the classroom, I always think about how I have a class of different learners. I have beginners, intermediate, and advanced
yeah,
learners. So, how do I meet all of their needs? And so, with these flashcards, I designed them so that some sides can be used for beginner learners, some size of flashcards can be used for intermediate or advanced. And they come with a teaching guide. So there's actual activities and games for parents to use for the flashcards. Because sometimes, the parents get flashcards and they say, what's this? What's this? It becomes like a rote memorization type of thing, and it's not interactive, it's not meaningful. So that's why I came up with a list of different activities for different learners so that they can make it more meaningful, make it more engaging, and play-based, so that kids want to learn how to read and recognize Chinese characters.
I think it's so nice. Like you say, resources can be really good or really bad, but it's how much we can do with them. So having this little booklet where you detail different activities is going to be really helpful.
Yes, it takes it to another level. It's not just flashcards to memorize. There's more meaning behind it. And as our audience can probably gather, learning language it has to be meaningful. It has to be purposeful in order for it to stick.
Thank you very much for all these little tips to make reading and writing in Chinese a lot easier, and maybe easier to memorize and more relevant for them to have a much better, more enjoyable experience of learning to read and write.
Right. Yeah, I'm excited to see how my own daughter develops in reading and writing. So I'll be sure to keep everyone posted on my social media accounts.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Yeah, because it's just the beginning for you.
Yeah, and have a good evening. Thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.